What did you steal? The question wasn't asked in private. A uniformed police officer stood in the middle of a crowded grocery store, his voice cutting through the soft music overhead and the low murmur of shoppers. His eyes were locked on one man, a black man standing beside a cart filled with ordinary groceries. No alarm had gone off. No employee had said a word. No evidence had been offered. Just an accusation. Cart stopped rolling. A cashier froze mid-scan. Someone near the dairy aisle let out a nervous laugh, then quickly went silent when no one else joined in. The man didn't respond right away. He looked at the officer, not with fear, not with anger, but with the kind of stillness that comes from understanding exactly what kind of moment this is. The officer expected fear. What he got instead was calm. "I'm sorry," the man finally said, his voice level. "What did you say?" The officer took one step closer, boots squeaking slightly against the tile. His hand rested casually near his belt. "I said," he repeated, slower this time, louder, "what did you steal?" A woman standing behind the man inhaled sharply. A teenage boy near the frozen foods section lowered his phone from his ear, attention fully captured now. The man glanced around, as if making sure everyone else had heard it too. "I didn't steal anything," he said. The officer smirked. "That's what everyone says." The words landed with weight. Not because they were loud, but because they were familiar. The man nodded once, almost to himself. "Am I being detained?" he asked. The officer tilted his head slightly, studying him. "But you got somewhere to be." A ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. People shifted their weight. Someone pretended to examine a shelf of canned soup without actually looking at it. "I'm asking a simple question," the man said. "Am I being detained?" The officer ignored it. "Where'd you get the bag?" he asked, pointing to a reusable grocery tote hanging off the cart. "From my car," the man replied. The officer stepped closer. "I'm gonna need to take a look inside." The man didn't move. "No," he said calmly. That word, "no," changed the air instantly. The officer's smile disappeared. "What did you just say?" "I said no," the man repeated. "I don't consent to a search." A murmur ran through the aisle. Someone whispered, "Is he allowed to do that?" The officer's posture stiffened. "You refusing a lawful order?" "I'm asserting my rights," the man said. "You don't have probable cause." The officer laughed, sharp, humorless. "Probable cause?" he echoed. "Are you a lawyer now?" The man didn't answer that. Instead, he took a slow breath and said, "You accused me of stealing. I'm asking you to explain why." The officer's jaw tightened. "I don't owe you an explanation." A store employee finally stepped forward, voice hesitant. "Officer, is there a problem here?" The officer didn't even look at him. "Stay out of it," he said. "This doesn't concern you." The man turned slightly toward the employee. "It's okay," he said gently. "I can handle this." That calm, that refusal to escalate, unsettled the officer more than shouting ever could. "You're awfully confident," the officer said. "Most people in your position aren't." The man met his eyes. "I haven't done anything wrong." The officer reached for the bag anyway. "Do not touch my property," the man said, louder now, but still controlled. The officer grabbed the handle and pulled. The cart jolted. A carton of eggs tipped, hit the floor and cracked open. Yellow spilled across the tile. A glass jar rolled out and shattered near the man's shoe. A woman gasped. Someone said, "Oh my God." The officer looked down at the mess, then back up at the man. "Now look what you did," he said. "Making a scene." "You did that," the man replied quietly. The officer leaned in close, voice dropping. "You're about to make this a lot worse for yourself." Several phones were out now. Not hidden anymore. Held at chest height. At eye level. Recording. "You're being recorded," the man said. The officer straightened and looked around. "Good," he said. "Let them see how non-compliant you're being." "I am not resisting," the man said. "I'm standing still. I'm answering your questions." "Turn around," the officer ordered. "Why?" The officer grabbed the man's wrist. "Turn around. Now." The man complied immediately, hands visible, movements slow. "I'm not resisting," he said again. "But I want it noted that you haven't explained why you're detaining me." The officer twisted his arm slightly, not enough to injure, but enough to remind him who had control. A woman shouted, "That's unnecessary." The officer snapped back, "Ma'am, mind your business." Another voice called out, "What did he even do?" The officer ignored them all. He pulled the man a few steps down the aisle, shoes slipping slightly in the spilled eggs. "You think you're smarter than me?" the officer said under his breath. "I think you're wrong," the man replied. The officer scoffed. "You people always think that." The words hung there, ugly, undeniable. The man's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. "You don't know anything about me." The officer reached for his radio. "Dispatch," he said. "I've got a suspicious individual refusing a lawful search." The man corrected him calmly. "It's not lawful." The officer continued anyway, requesting backup. The radio crackled. The grocery store felt smaller now. Every movement watched. The man glanced at the broken groceries on the floor, eggs wasted, glass glittering under fluorescent lights, then back at the officer. "There are cameras in this store," he said. "And witnesses." The officer smiled. "Good." He leaned closer again. "Because when this is over," he said, "you're gonna wish you just cooperated." The man looked him straight in the eye. "You're making a serious mistake." The officer laughed. "People like you always say that." The man paused. Then he spoke, not angrier, just certain. "People like me," he said, "don't usually get treated like this." The officer shook his head. "Get used to it." The man didn't respond. He just stood there restrained, humiliated, surrounded by strangers, completely composed. And somewhere between the recording phones, the spilled groceries, and the officer's growing confidence, a line had already been crossed. The kind you can't uncross. The officer didn't hurry. That was the part most people missed. He didn't rush to cuffs. He didn't shout commands back to back. He took his time, the way someone does when they believe the room belongs to them. "Stand right there," he said, guiding the man toward the end of the aisle. "Don't move." The man stood exactly where he was placed. Hands visible. Posture straight. Breathing slow. Every instinct in his body understood the danger of sudden movement. Not because he was guilty, but because he had seen this kind of moment before. The way authority hardened when it felt questioned. The way dignity, to the wrong person, looked like defiance. Around them, the grocery store existed in fragments. A cashier stared too long, then looked away. A stock clerk pretended to adjust a shelf that didn't need adjusting. Two customers whispered urgently, then stopped when the officer's head turned slightly in their direction. No one intervened. Not because they agreed, but because they were afraid. The officer finally turned back to the man. "Name," he said. The man answered. "ID." "I don't have it on me," the man replied. "I walked over from my apartment." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Convenient." "It's not illegal," the man said calmly. The officer stepped closer again, invading space deliberately. "Everything you're doing right now is making this worse." "I'm standing still," the man replied. "I'm answering your questions." The officer studied him, not just his face, but his shoes, his jacket, the way he carried himself. This wasn't the posture he was used to, this wasn't submission, it irritated him. "You think you're special," the officer said. "I think I'm a citizen," the man replied. "Same as everyone else here." That word, citizen, struck something. The officer's jaw flexed. "You don't get to lecture me on my job." "I'm not," the man said. "I'm asking you to follow it." A long pause followed, the kind that made the room feel heavier. Finally, the officer turned away and spoke loudly enough for others to hear. "Dispatch is sending a unit. Until then, you're being detained." "For what reason?" the man asked. The officer didn't answer. He paced once, then twice, boots echoing faintly on the tile. His confidence was growing now, fed by the absence of challenge, by the silence of witnesses, by the fact that no one in authority had arrived to question him yet. This was how it always happened. Not in one dramatic act, but in small unchecked steps. You know, the officer said suddenly, stopping in front of the man again, you could have avoided all of this. The man met his gaze. How? By just cooperating. I did cooperate, the man said. I didn't consent. The officer smiled thinly. Same thing to me. A woman at the end of the aisle finally spoke, voice trembling. Officer, he really hasn't done anything. The officer turned his head slowly. Ma'am, he said, this is not a discussion. She opened her mouth as if to say more, then closed it. Her shoulders sank. She looked down at the floor. The officer turned back to the man. See, he said quietly, even they know when to stay out of it. The man didn't respond. Inside him, something steadier than anger took hold, resolve. The kind that didn't need to be loud. You're detaining me without cause, he said. That's unlawful. The officer exhaled sharply through his nose. You really don't know when to stop. I do, the man replied. When the law is followed. That was the moment the officer crossed from irritation into escalation. He reached for the cuffs. Several people reacted instinctively. A sharp inhale, a step back, a muttered oh no. The officer paused, cuffs dangling, just long enough to feel the power of it. Turn around, he ordered again. The man turned, slowly, deliberately. I'm not resisting, he said for the third time. But I am objecting. The officer ignored that too. He snapped one cuff onto the man's wrist. The metal click echoed louder than it should have. The man's shoulders tensed for just a second, then settled. The officer hesitated before securing the second cuff. Something about this didn't feel right. Not because it was wrong, that realization hadn't arrived yet, but because the man wasn't reacting the way he was supposed to. No pleading. No shouting. No collapse. Just quiet observation. You real calm for someone in cuffs, the officer said. The man looked at him over his shoulder. Being calm has kept me alive, he replied. That landed. The officer looked away first. As he secured the second cuff, footsteps approached from the front of the store. A store manager appeared, face pale, hands clasped nervously. Officer, he said, I don't recall anyone reporting the theft. The officer didn't turn around. I observed suspicious behavior. What behavior? The manager asked carefully. The officer finally looked at him, really looked. You questioning me? No, sir, the manager replied quickly. Then stay in your lane. The manager nodded and stepped back, defeated. The officer turned the man toward him again. You're being detained until we figure this out. The man nodded once. That's fine, he said. But understand this, everything you're doing is being documented. The officer scoffed. By who? The man didn't answer. That silence unsettled him more than words. Moments later, another officer entered the store. Younger. Less certain. Eyes scanning the scene quickly. What we got? The second officer asked. The first officer gestured casually. Suspicious male, refusing search, uncooperative. The man spoke immediately. That's not accurate, he said. I complied with all commands. I declined an unlawful search. The second officer hesitated. Sir, he said to the first, what was the original call? There wasn't one, the man said. The first officer shot him a warning look. Did you see him take anything? The second officer asked. The first officer paused, just a fraction too long. I observed indicators. Which were? The second officer pressed. The store was silent again. Everyone was listening now. The first officer's voice hardened. Are you questioning my judgment? The second officer swallowed. No, sir. There it was again. Silence. Compliance. The first officer turned back to the man, confidence restored. You're gonna sit tight until I'm done, he said. The man nodded. I will, he replied. But when this ends, it won't end quietly. The officer smirked. They always think that. The man looked past him, not at the people, not at the mess on the floor, but at the ceiling where cameras blinked silently. This will be reviewed, he said calmly. The officer laughed once. By who? The man finally answered. People who understand the law better than you. The officer stared at him. For the first time, doubt flickered. But it was too late now. He had already gone too far to stop. The store felt different now. The second officer stood a few feet back, hands resting awkwardly on his vest, eyes moving between the man in cuffs and his superior. He had the look of someone who had stepped into a situation already in motion. A situation with momentum he didn't control. So, the younger officer said carefully, "What's the plan?" The first officer didn't answer right away. He was watching the man. The way he stood. The way he breathed. The way he didn't ask for favors or mercy. That confidence hadn't cracked. If anything, it had settled deeper. "We're verifying identity," the first officer said finally. "Until then, he's detained." The man nodded once. "That's reasonable," he said. The officer narrowed his eyes. "You don't sound worried." "I'm not," the man replied. The officer scoffed. "You should be." The man didn't rise to it. "Officer," he said evenly, "I'd like to ask you something." The officer crossed his arms. "Now you want to ask questions?" "Yes," the man replied. "What do you think happens next?" The officer chuckled. "What happens next is I figure out what you're hiding." The man tilted his head slightly. "And if you don't find anything?" The officer shrugged. "Then we'll see." "That uncertainty," the man said, "is exactly the problem." The second officer shifted uncomfortably. "Sir," he said quietly to the first, "we still haven't established probable cause." The first officer shot him a look. "I told you, I observed suspicious behavior." The man interjected calmly. "Standing in a grocery store with a cart?" The officer ignored him. The second officer hesitated, then tried again. "Did the store report anything missing?" "No," the store manager said from a distance, voice tight. "Inventory's fine." The officer's jaw tightened. "Then why is he in cuffs?" the second officer asked. The first officer turned sharply. "You're getting real comfortable questioning me." "I'm trying to understand," the second officer said. "That's all." The man watched the exchange quietly. This wasn't anger anymore. This was procedure, or the lack of it, laid bare. "Let's start over," the man said. "What's your name, officer?" The first officer laughed. "You don't get to interview me." The man nodded. "That's fair," he said. "Then let's do it your way." The officer raised an eyebrow. "You still haven't told me who you are." "I will," the man said. "At the appropriate time." The officer scoffed again. "There it is," he said. "Dodging." The man shook his head. "No," he said. "Timing." The second officer looked between them. "Sir," he said to the man, "do you have identification anywhere nearby?" "Yes," the man replied. "In my apartment. 2 blocks from here." The officer smiled triumphantly. "Convenient again." The man met his eyes. "You're welcome to retrieve it." The officer blinked. "You expect me to leave you unattended?" "No," the man said. "I expect you to follow procedure." The second officer spoke up quickly. "I can go with him," he offered. "Escort." The first officer hesitated. That hesitation was small, barely visible, but it was the first crack. He hadn't planned this far. "Fine," he said. "But I'm staying here." The man nodded. "That's acceptable." As the second officer prepared to leave, he leaned in slightly and spoke quietly to the man. "Address." The man gave it. As the officer walked out, the first officer exhaled sharply. "You're enjoying this," he accused. The man looked at him. "No," he said. "I'm enduring it." The officer paced once, then stopped. "You think cuffs make you look noble?" "I think they make your choices visible," the man replied. The officer clenched his jaw. "You really think this ends well for you?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the store, the witnesses, the mess, the silence that had replaced everyday noise. "It depends," he said finally, "on whether you can admit a mistake." The officer laughed bitterly. "Cops don't make mistakes." The man met his gaze. "That's not true," he said. "They make them every day." The officer stepped closer. "You trying to threaten me?" "No," the man replied. "I'm trying to warn you." The officer leaned in, voice low. You don't have that kind of power. The man didn't flinch. Not yet, he said. That unsettled him. Minutes passed. The officer's radio crackled once, static, then fell silent again. The man shifted his weight slightly, cuffs clinking softly. Uncomfortable? The officer asked. A little, the man replied honestly. But discomfort passes. The officer scoffed. So does detention. Yes, the man said. But records don't. The officer stiffened. What records? The man didn't answer. He didn't need to. The second officer returned. He walked slower now. Deliberate. The first officer noticed immediately. What took so long? He asked. The second officer didn't respond right away. He handed over a wallet. Sir, he said quietly, this is his ID. The first officer took it and flipped it open. He scanned it once. Then again. His brow furrowed. That's not, he started. He checked the name again. Then the address. Then the seal. His posture shifted. The second officer cleared his throat. There's more, he said. The first officer looked up sharply. What? The second officer lowered his voice. He's a judge. The word landed without sound, but it hit like weight. The first officer laughed reflexively. No, he's not. The second officer didn't laugh. He is, he said. County level, appointed, sitting. The first officer's mouth opened, then closed. He looked back down at the ID. Then at the man. For the first time since this began, his confidence faltered completely. The man watched him, not smug, not satisfied. Just steady. I didn't lie to you, the man said quietly. I just didn't volunteer information. The officer swallowed. That doesn't change anything, he said weakly. It changes everything, the man replied. The officer glanced around. The witnesses hadn't moved. They were watching now, really watching. You could have said something, the officer snapped. The man tilted his head. And would that have stopped you? He asked. The officer didn't answer. You accused me before you knew who I was, the man continued. You searched me before you had cause. You cuffed me before you asked a single lawful question. The officer's face flushed. This is turning into something it doesn't need to be. It already is, the man said. The second officer spoke carefully. Sir, we should remove the cuffs. The first officer hesitated. Then, reluctantly, he unlocked them. The metal released with a soft click. The man rubbed his wrists briefly, then lowered his hands. No theatrics. Just presence. You're free to go, the officer muttered. The man didn't move. No, he said. I'm not. The officer frowned. What do you mean? I'm not leaving, the man replied. Not yet. The officer stared. You can't just. I can, the man said. And I will. He looked around the store again. This didn't happen in private, he said. So it won't be resolved in private. The officer's voice dropped. What do you want? The man met his eyes. I want you to understand something, he said. You didn't stop when you thought I was powerless. You stopped when you learned I wasn't. The store was silent. That, the man said, is the problem. The officer looked away. For the first time, he had nothing to say. And everyone could feel it. The store didn't return to normal right away. People didn't suddenly start shopping again. No one laughed it off. No one pretended it hadn't happened. The air stayed heavy, like everyone understood they had just witnessed something that couldn't be unseen. The officer stood a few steps away now, arms stiff at his sides, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The confidence he'd carried so easily earlier was gone. In its place sat something unfamiliar. The judge adjusted his jacket slowly, deliberately. His movements were calm, but his posture had changed. Not defensive. Not submissive, grounded. I'm going to ask you again, he said evenly. Why did you stop me? The officer didn't answer. I want your reasoning, the judge continued. Not your instinct. Not your assumption. Your reasoning. The officer shifted his weight. I thought you were acting suspicious. The judge nodded once. In what way? The officer hesitated. You are lingering. The judge glanced down at the groceries still scattered on the floor. In a grocery store, he said, with a cart. The judge turned slightly toward the second officer. You retrieved my identification, he said. What did you observe? The second officer straightened. That there was no warrant, he said carefully. No call. No report of theft. And no probable cause, the judge added. Yes, sir, the officer replied. The judge turned back to the first officer. You didn't ask my name before accusing me, he said. You didn't ask the store if anything was missing. You didn't warn me before detaining me. Each sentence landed like a weight. You escalated immediately, the judge continued. And you escalated publicly. The officer swallowed. I was doing my job. The judge met his eyes. No, he said. You were doing what felt easy. That sentence changed something. The officer opened his mouth, then closed it. The judge gestured toward the broken groceries. You made a mess, he said. Not just on this floor. He turned to the store manager. I'd like the surveillance footage preserved, he said. All angles. Immediately. The manager nodded quickly. Of course. The officer's head snapped up. You're not serious, he said. The judge looked at him. I am. The officer took a step forward. This doesn't need to go any further. The judge's voice never rose. It already has. He turned to the second officer again. I'm requesting a supervisor on scene, he said. Not to escalate, to document. The second officer nodded and spoke into his radio. The first officer exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. You could have handled this quietly, he muttered. The judge replied without hesitation. So could you? Minutes passed. Long, uncomfortable minutes. When the supervisor arrived, the dynamic shifted immediately. Questions were asked, real ones this time. Timelines reconstructed. Decisions examined. The judge answered everything calmly, precisely, without embellishment. The officer struggled. His explanations grew shorter, less confident, more defensive. At one point, the supervisor looked at him and said quietly, "Why didn't you disengage?" The officer had no answer. Eventually, the supervisor turned to the judge. "Sir," he said, "on behalf of the department, I apologize." The judge nodded once. "I accept the apology," he said, "but apologies don't correct behavior." The supervisor understood. "There will be a formal review," he said. "Immediate." The officer stiffened. "You're suspending me?" he asked. "Pending investigation," the supervisor replied. The words echoed. Pending investigation. The judge didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply watched as the badge that had been used as a weapon moments earlier suddenly felt very heavy. Before leaving, the judge turned back one last time. "I want to be clear," he said. "This isn't about me." He gestured toward the store, toward the witnesses, toward the silence that had filled the room earlier. This is about the person who wouldn't have been believed, the person who wouldn't have been uncuffed, the person who wouldn't have walked away. The officer stared at the floor. "You didn't stop because you realized you were wrong," the judge said. "You stopped because you realized who I was." He paused. That distinction matters. The judge picked up what remained of his groceries, thanked the store staff quietly, and walked toward the exit. No applause followed him. No cheers. Just reflection. Because everyone there understood something now. Justice hadn't arrived because the system worked perfectly. It arrived because someone with power refused to let abuse hide behind routine. And the question lingered, heavy and unavoidable. What if he hadn't been a judge? If you were there that day, would you record, or would you look away? What should accountability look like in moments like this? Punishment? Reform? Or both? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you believe stories like this matter, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us for more cinematic justice stories that challenge silence and expose truth. Because the question isn't whether injustice happens. It's whether we're willing to confront it, even when it's uncomfortable.